back to school at a time when there's a high degree of focus on what is being called academic recovery is both an exciting and challenging time. The Learning First Alliance is pleased to bring you this 30-minute podcast on academic recovery from three unique perspectives. One, interpreting the data from the National Center for Educational Statistics. Two, a student talking about what all of this means and how they feel about it. And three, two educators who have taken the long road to significant improvement in their school's academic progress. Each one of these interviews is really being presented to you as part of an ongoing conversation. You'll notice that with each one, that you'll almost be dropped into the middle of an ongoing conversation. And I think you'll quickly pick up both on the tone and the strength of these really interesting people. First, I'd like to bring you an elementary school principal from Alabama who is award-winning and also a member of the National Assessment Governing Board. Dilhani Yuswati has been a principal for well over 10 years. She goes by the name Dil. Dil, what are the high points from the latest NCES data?
Some of the biggest takeaways that we saw, while there was many things to take away, we saw that the scores declined compared to last assessments across all subjects: math, reading, civics, and U.S. history. Except for civics, again, it was a case of pre-pandemic declines continuing for several years, or in some cases, even more than a decade. So while we saw that the pandemic may have exaggerated those losses, it certainly did not create them. Another unfortunate trend that we saw across subjects, widening of the gap between the higher middle versus the lower performers. And again, in many cases, that too started before COVID. And then I also want to point out, as a former math teacher, the data that we got from the NAEP report card for grade 4 and 8. We saw, Rich, the largest national declines in math that we had ever seen. And again, as someone who taught math and as someone who knows the importance of having a strong STEM community, students who are ready to engage and work in those STEM fields, if our math scores are not where they are, they're going to have a very difficult time entering those fields. So I think that is a very important highlighted data point that we need to look at. And then last but not least, I would say another troublesome point for me was when we look at the 2023 long-term trend reading and math assessment data, we saw that the percentage of students that reported missing 5 or more days in a school month doubled. As we know, we can't teach kids if they're not in school. So to me, those are some of the highlights from the recent NAEP reports that we need to be concerned about. I would say just the fact that we are declining in every single category, that says to me that there are systemic issues in our schools, right? It's not just about math or just about reading. It's not a particular subject. So overall, there are clearly many things we need to do at the school and district levels to support our kids' learning in general. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And when you then are opening your school, what new emphases are you putting this year versus in past years? You've been a principal for what, 8, 9 years now?
Over 10 years. The one thing I will say, and I was going to mention this further in our discussion, but I really think that one of the things we need to do as a country, and I certainly emphasize to our teachers, is that we need to raise the bar for all of our students. I think part of our reason why we are seeing the scores that we are seeing, and certainly not a dramatic increase, is that we may not be raising the bar high enough for all of our students. We think that our students can only do this level, and I'm making a gesture with my hand kind of halfway to my face, when really we should be raising that bar where they could do so much. And what I've noticed is that when teachers, and certainly when principals, say, hey, we're raising the expectations of all, guess what? Our students are able to meet those expectations, but it's up to us to raise those expectations.
What do you think's holding us back?
Rich, I think a part of the problem is that we are asking a lot of our teachers. And in many cases, our teachers are not always trained in the things that we're asking them to do. I'm going to give you an example. Reading. Many people who go to their education schools, they're not taught explicitly how to teach reading, all the different components. Now there are many states that are offering additional PD to teach teachers how to teach reading very explicitly. So again, until teachers get that rich coursework themselves, I think it's hard for them to turn around to know what to do with their students. So I really do think part of our problem is that we're not training our teachers adequately to be able to do what we're asking them to do. That's one piece. Second thing is, I think, especially the elementary level, we are asking our teachers to do so much. We're asking them to be reading experts, math experts, emotional support behavior experts. We're asking them to do so much. And somehow we have got to figure out how to train all of our teachers, but also give them the time to collaborate with each other to get the job done. When I look at what we're asking our teachers to do in the day and how much time they have actually to prepare, it's really, in my opinion, not acceptable that our job is to look at the whole child. So I know what we're discussing is mostly academics, but we are tasked with looking at their academics, their social well-being, their emotional well-being. And quite honestly, even though some may believe the pandemic is over, honestly, many of us in the school world are seeing the kids unravel from that. They're now showing us how they have been impacted. So the road is long. There's much to do, but I also have a sense that educators are willing and wanting to help all of these kids succeed. But as you said, it's hard to have a focus on one thing when there is so much that we're being asked to look at.
When I look at conflict resolution in times of uncertainty, the data is amazing to me that the prediction is it's going to be 10 years until we're actually through this level of uncertainty and change. That makes your job all that much harder.
Again, another great point, Rich, because here's what happens. I think often short and long-term strategies is this idea that we do need to figure out, though, how we can accelerate student learning. Because I feel like if we don't take the time to continue to provide those efforts, especially to those students who are in the lower percentiles, we're just always going to be behind. And my fear is now that there is going to be a loss of the ESSER funds, many schools are now having to say goodbye to these interventionists that have helped enormously to close learning gaps. So that does concern me. I think if we were smart as a nation, if there was a way to not lose those interventionists who have made an incredible impact on closing those gaps, we need to do that. Because again, we are not out of the hole, so to speak, from the pandemic losses. And again, the losses were even there before. And we have seen what interventionists can do to help, especially those students that need a smaller learning community to learn.
Thank you, Dil, for providing us with insights to the meaning of the NCES data. We certainly have work to do, and this helps us to focus our time and energy and to learn what you have done to be successful in your school. Next, we have a rising sophomore in a New Jersey high school, Olivia, talking to us about her sense and her feelings about her school, safety, and academic change. And again, this is in the middle of an ongoing discussion. Since the pandemic hit, there's been a lot of talk about what nationally adults are calling academic recovery. That is to mean that kids are not doing as well academically as they were before the pandemic. Is that something you've observed, or is that a national thing that is a thing for you?
I mean, I think that people still definitely care about their grades, and I'm sure they hope for their grades to be good. But I think it more has to do with motivation and how much they really want to work on their grades and all of that. Because I think that because before the pandemic, at least when the pandemic started, we went online, at least for my school. We didn't have to do any Google Meets or anything. There was just an assignment and we had to do it by the end of the day, and that was it. And I feel like it wasn't that much work for us to do, or it wasn't a lot of pressure on us. And then going back into the classroom where it was just a ton of work piled on us, I think it was just a lot of stress for students piled up on them. And with that and homework after school, it's just a lot of work for students. I think it's just a lot of stress that they have to deal with. So that could be a reason why they just feel less motivated to do it. And getting back into the classroom, like the difference of working in groups or working alone, and just getting back into how it is versus when it was online. And another thing that at least that I've noticed since I'm going into junior year, I've kind of been noticed stuff about college and applying for all of that. A lot of schools now have changed to be test optional. And I think that it adds a lot more competition, but it also adds for a lot of students to maybe think that they don't have to do as much work and put as much work in, because if the school that they want to get into doesn't require them to put in a test score, then they might not have to work on that test score. And I feel like it's like a mindset that they might not have to put as much work into it anymore. And so overall, it definitely depends on the students. The stress of everything that I feel like we all have to deal with now because of what happened in the pandemic and going back to school, I think some students' grades may drop from the stress. Others may push and work harder from that. So I think it really depends, but I'm sure that some students, just from the stress, it all piles on them and it causes their grades to drop.
You implied that there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of applying to college and what counts, what doesn't count, and those kinds
Yeah.
of things. How do you feel about that uncertainty? I mean, before it was if you took the SAT and you scored a gazillion points, basically you got into almost any place you applied. Now they don't take that test, and you're a hard worker.
Yeah, I mean, I've been practicing for the ACT and all that stuff. So at least for me, most of the schools I want to apply to do require a test score. But even if I want to apply to a school that wasn't, it makes me more nervous because it's just kind of like I'd rather be required so then I wouldn't have to worry about should I submit it or should I not? Like, what's better? If I submit it or not, what would be better for me? What's the better chance of me getting into the college? And I think it's just like more stress with that. Not only do I have to think about that, but it's just like the test score itself is a lot to work on. So I think it's just like added stress from all that.
Yeah, you use the word stress a lot, which leads me to the thing of are your teachers aware of how much stress you're under?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some are, but it's a lot of stress, at least for me. I've never had teachers mention that to me, so I don't know if they are fully aware. They might understand that obviously when you're sent home with a lot of work to study for, if you have a test to study for, a lot of homework that might cause stress, but I don't know if they are fully aware of how much I guess it impacts us. If I have a test the next day, at least for me, I study for hours and I won't be able to fully focus on anything else because I have to do this test and I want to get a good grade on it. And it kind of like it affects my GPA and affects me getting into a college I want to get into. And I don't know if teachers fully aware how much I guess that affects us.
Do you think that helps you to perform better, or do you think it actually hurts you?
Like having the stress?
Yes.
I mean, at least for me, I feel like it helps me maybe a little bit because I feel like I perform better when I'm stressed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
But I know there's a lot of people that when they're stressed out, they perform a lot worse than they could. So it depends when I'm studying for like the ACT, the math and the English section, I perform better with stress. But when I have to concentrate and really think in the reading section, that it slows me down. So I think it really depends on what I'm doing. So overall, I think it may help me in a way, but it definitely, for other people, I know it does hurt them a lot having that added stress.
If you were getting into school administration, helping to run the school, what would you want for the kids who are having trouble dealing with the stress?
I would say I think that it would help maybe just having a smaller workload, I think. And obviously, I think that at least with the homework and stuff, I think that having homework and all that is really important because it helps kids and it helps students learn more and faster. But I think that at least I know I had a teacher last year who he only gave us homework if we didn't finish it in class. And I think that that's a way to get the same amount of work done, but just not have as much work to do at home and then stress about when you get home and then go into the next day again. So I think it's just like how I think that having students have less work to do may help them deal with that stress and have less of it.
Do you, like the work you get, does it cause you to think, or do you feel like you're doing a lot of the same type of math problem over and over again?
Yeah. If it's in math, I feel like I've done a lot of repeating questions and stuff like that. With my homework in math, it's definitely a lot of the same questions. And in classes in like English, I'm reading a book and I'll have reading homework. I'll have an essay to write, stuff like that. But there's definitely some classes in chemistry and I'll be taking environmental science, then physics senior year. And there's a lot of stuff that you have to think about. So I would say like math, it's less thinking and more repeating questions that you did in the class. But for other classes, there's definitely questions where you really have to think about what to say or what to do.
And what type of questions do you want to be pushed on? Because you're saying that the stress kind of helps you to perform better. What type of questions or tests help you to reach your peak?
I think that questions like really just like making me think will help me. And when I'm in the classroom and then I do these questions and then I go home and I do the same questions, I don't necessarily think I'm learning anything new from that. I'm learning the same thing over and over again. And that can help me perfect a certain subject or kind of question. But I think that trying to do multiple different types of questions is more helpful. And maybe tackling different kinds of questions each day is beneficial than doing the same types of work every single day for a month. I feel it helped to differentiate in that.
I think Olivia gives us really key insight, things we can learn from, an important perspective as we build stronger and more effective programs. Our third and final segment is with John Murphy, Scott Miller. Both of them work in the South Huntington School District. And for well over 10 years, they had worked and seen their school district change. They will talk about that change and how they used a technique of encouraging more than half of their students to take AP classes and tests and the impact that it had on their well-being. But more importantly, they talked about what they did to build up this sense of expectations. Just as Dill mentioned in her presentation that rising expectations is a critical part of success, these two educators at the high school level demonstrate how this can be done.
John Murphy, what was that initial hurdle like?
The gearing up was the most exciting and terrifying part. The 2 years of training and getting the mindset change. It was the biggest hurdle to overcome, and that was the most exciting. After they had the aha, everything was so much easier. So it was so much easier when everybody's moving towards a common goal.
Well, on that point, did you find that you had some initial small successes, and when people saw it, it was, oh, I want more of that? Or how did that moment happen?
Students early, if you want them to be an advanced level coursework, for the most part, you're not changing a student's mind in high school level. You need to make them start believing that they can do this work at an earlier age, middle school, and finding the support structures in order to be able to identify them and then support them so they can have the confidence to be successful at the high school.
I mean, even now, we're starting to plan having elementary students visit college campuses so that they can believe it, that could be their future. Because a lot of our families, their families may not even finished high school, forget about going to college. And they need to know that that is on their radar. It is a possibility, right? I had said to John earlier this morning, it's not just about looking at who you want to take advanced placement courses. You train your teachers and now you put the kids in and you roll. It's a culture shift. That's the biggest thing here. The big takeaway, if anybody wants to do something like this, it's not just changing a simple structure, about changing the culture in your building and in your district to believe in the capability that all kids can do advanced work.
Well, you put an interesting perspective on the table, because I've been in this business for well over 40 years, and people say, well, we know all kids can learn, and we know that it's the relationship that makes a difference. But you guys have found a way to do that in such a way that shows real progress.
We've been able to see real success with a lot of our students. So I know you're not from Long Island, but Long Island, and especially in the last 20 years, the demographics have changed considerably. You didn't see, except for small townships or a few townships within Suffolk County that would be diverse, or it would host a large Hispanic or Black population. Whereas as the city spread out, you're seeing the face of Long Island change. And Huntington Station is no different. 20 years ago, you would have 60 to 70% Caucasian families, and it was small pocket. Now we're at less than 50%, and 40% of that is Hispanic, which half of them are first language learners. And the problem is a lot of figured out or trying to figure out and starting to figure out they think that they can do the same thing and get the same results that it was 20 years ago. And that's not going to work. And I think that's where we talk about that mindset. We talk about that changing perspectives and changing our tactics to make sure that our teachers and our educators and our board of education understand that we're in a different demographic now. And how are we going to make sure, what are we going to do to support and make sure that all students, no matter what is sitting in front of you, what their issues, what the problems that may ensue with them, how are we going to make sure that they're going to be just as successful as the kid that sat there 20 years ago? And that's really what we've been focusing on.
And I think, well, no, I don't think, I know that the district, we don't turn a blind eye to the struggles that we're encountering, right? We embrace them. We don't call them struggles, we call them opportunities. What opportunities exist out there that we can take in and embrace and say, this is happening, regardless of what your thoughts are on immigration, for example, or whatever, it doesn't matter. These are the kids given to us, regardless, because you have different philosophies of everybody throughout the community, including the school community. But you're there for kids and you're there to better programs for those kids. If you can give them that opportunity, that's great. The culture shift has been a lot of changing the mindset of teachers, changing the mindset of kids, changing the mindset of parents in the community. That doesn't just come about because you want to increase the number of AP people. It comes about because you really took the time to reach out, engage populations of people that may not have felt like they were engaged in the past. And this will be my 18th year, and I've seen the change over time that has been just so positive.
Years ago, when the STEM movement was starting, we had a lot of kids saying that I don't have the math gene. So they would struggle a full 5 minutes with a math problem and then give up because to be good in math required some other genetic material. How did you guys overcome that?
Well, I think it's a lot of intensive conversations. A lot of it starts in the household because your biggest, especially as a younger child, the person that you're going to rely to learn about the world and learn about what they can and can't do are your parents. Teachers are probably the second most important. So as Scott had talked about, really the three groups that you have to focus on when you start to build and you want to see students be more successful is you have to be supportive of parents, supportive teachers, and really supportive students. And you have to change that, what they believe a student can and can't do. So one of the first things you do as an early age, as we talked about, is start doing college visits as elementary. Doesn't mean you're changing their curriculum, you're changing anything, you're teaching them, but you're showing what potentially could be the outcome for a student, even at a third and fourth grade level. Because now it's not so foreign. It's what's that college? What do you mean? What is a university? I have no idea what you're talking about. You're giving perspective and context. Then you go into parents and you're giving the parents the same thing. You're talking with somebody in middle school about how there's programs that you're going to be able to pay for college that are going to be able to support. There's assistance programs, because instead of saying, well, we're never going to talk about college because we're never going to be able to afford it, because you need to get rid of that misnomer with parents. And then you have the other thing where you're focusing on with students. You're saying, okay, showing them that or giving them the tools or even the supports that they can do better throughout. So when we do start to challenge them, and it's going to be challenging, they don't just give up, like you said, with the STEM. Of course, if you give a student 5 minutes, or if you give them math problems and they have no idea the context of how to do that math, you give them 5 minutes or 50 minutes, they're still not going to be able to do the problem. So you have to give them the tools before you put that math problem in front of them. Before we say college or AP or advanced level courses are going to be in your future, you got to give them the tools in order to be able to attack that and be able to be successful in that. And you got to get teachers to understand we're not going to say, well, he or she can't do it. He or she can do it. And you have to make sure that they understand that there are processes or that there's an ability for them to do it. And you got to get the teachers to believe in that as well.
And those support structures that put in the school day. So, for example, we have learning labs for all the 4 major subjects during the school day. That is a tremendous help because that allows us to place kids who might struggle academically into those groups and mandate it, or have a student who is sitting in lunch or has a study hall. We try to avoid study halls at all costs, but sometimes in there to be able to go down and to get the support they need. It may be an algebra, which is the first math you're taking, or it could be an algebra 2, which is a major struggle for an advanced collegiate diploma in New York State. So we've afforded them that opportunity during the school day and giving them those supports. We have online supports, for example. So if they're home because the population of our kids have to go home and take care of a younger sibling. They may have to go home and work. So how do they fit that into their schedule? We have to adjust. We can't expect kids and families to adjust what our needs are. We have to adjust to what their needs are, right?
Yep.
That is what we try to always do, have these conversations. How do we better what we're doing for our clientele? We are in the customer service industry. That's what education's supposed to be. And I don't believe a lot of educators think of it that way. We think, oh, we're teaching and they better come and meet us here and do what they're supposed to do. We're in the customer service industry. We need to provide the highest level of customer service.
Interview was first pitched to me at about your using the AP program as an anchor. It seems to me like that's the smallest part of the program.
100%. It is. We can't tell College Board that. I mean, they even asked us to go out to Seattle and present this summer. And listen, College Board's great and the AP is great, but that's the end of the marathon. That's like the last mile of the 23rd.
Right.
There's 22 other miles that you have to go through in order to get to that point to make sure that the kids are going to be successful. And it's all the work before that.
And that's why I said it's a cultural shift. You can't say somebody can't go in, and we said this when we were presenting in Seattle and other places, that you can't just say, I'm going to increase the number of APs. We're going to get rid of honors for social studies. We'll put them in APs. We'll train the teachers. We'll tell the parents and the students we're going to do it, and off we go. It doesn't work that way because you have to make people believe in it. You have to give them the proper supports, and that's it. The proper supports at all levels. All the stakeholders need to believe in it, right? And that's taken a long time, years to get there, right? And I know a lot of it has to do with our teaching staff. Our teaching staff know our kids. They know them. They know where they work. They know about their families. They know what they did on a Saturday, a Sunday. They know their kids so well. They develop really strong relationships. That is what makes it happen.
I would like to thank all four of our presenters. They made numerous incredibly important points, but did you catch that each one of them had mentioned about rising expectation? And what I think is important about having the student voice is to also understand the counterbalancing sense of pressure and how that pressure is sensed by the learner. We also found that each one of these people are in different environments and yet working towards making a difference for their children and working in different ways that reflect what their communities and schools already offer and what they're trying to build. I think it also charges us to help them and others to do this job so that we can demonstrate that we're here for the kid.